Hi, so welcome to another subject video where today's subject we're going to be looking at the controlled stop or the emergency stop. So what we're going to be covering today, if we just have a look at the little slide, and you can download this in the description and there'll be a worksheet for you to complete as well. So if you listen along to this, you'll have all the information you know that you need to fill out the worksheet and build your knowledge up in this subject. So things we're going to cover today are looking at the fitness of your pupil and the car. Are they able to do this? We're going to look at safe locations. We're going to look at establishing the need to practice an emergency stop. We're going to look at the things to include in your briefings. So I'll go through them in a minute. I won't read all them out, but we're going to look at what goes in that lesson. What are the ingredients to a good emergency stop lesson? We're going to think about how we're going to manage risks from behinds. We're going to talk about doing dry runs and slow runs, and talk about how many practices you should do when delivering this topic and how long you should spend on it. So that gives us the scope of the lesson today. So let's start. So I guess if we just start by defining what is an emergency stop. So it's different to harsh braking, because we might brake harshly because the lights have changed, etc., because we haven't been planning very well. So it's a bit of a step up from a harsh brake. We're stopping in the event of emergency, and we're stopping ultimately to preserve human life. So if a child were to run out, this is how we would brake to save their life. So that's sort of if you think about the difference, it's a full-on emergency stop. So that's what we're talking about today. So we need to think about the fitness of our pupil. So think about things like, would you ask your pupil if they were heavily pregnant to do an emergency stop exercise? I think that's something that could wait for another day. So we'd need to consult with them. Just on that subject, if you've got a pupil that's coming up for test and they're heavily pregnant, they're not allowed to say to the examiner, I don't want to do the emergency stop, because the response from an examiner would be, well, you need to be fit to do your test. If you don't feel you're fit to drive today, then postpone your test till after you've had the baby. However, any examiner, using, I guess, just being human, using common sense, if they saw someone heavily pregnant, I would guess that they would choose not to do the emergency stop exercise. So, but they can't request for it not to be done. So I would think the examiner would use a bit of judgment, but that's not an official line. That's just my opinion. In terms of the emergency stop on tests, 1 in 3 tests will have an emergency stop. So they have got that kind of discretion that they could use. Whereas in the old days, an emergency stop was on every test. So so you think about the fitness of a pupil, think about pregnant ladies. What if they had a bad back, if they're suffering from a football injury, or, they've been at work and they've done their back in. Wait, this lesson can wait till they're fit to do it. So just use common sense with that. But you've got to ask them. You can't assume, and ask them. Then we need to think about your car. So if you've got like books on the back seat, cans rolling around, things like this, you might be using the pupil's car to do a lesson, because they're going to use it for the test. So again, are there things in the boot that we need to be aware of that that could move forwards, get damaged, affect our safety? So we want to make sure our pupil and the car are fit to do this harsh braking, this emergency stop. And also just think about when you present your car to test, get all your books tidied away in the boot in a little box so they don't all rattle around, because the examiners would kind of appreciate that. They don't like stuff falling on the floor, because then they're going to worry if it's going to slide under the seat, under the brakes. So now we've got a big safety issue. So that's that. Moving on to the next one, let's just roll that up a little bit. So let's think about safe locations. So where would you be doing an emergency stop? Would you be doing this on a rural road with a 60 limit? No, you wouldn't. So we need to be in 30 limits. 20 miles an hour is a little bit too slow in terms of a test condition. So you'll find that examiners will be conducting this in 30-mile-an-hour limit, not 20s, because they need them at least 20 miles an hour, but not over 30. Okay, to make it a valid test, to make it a proper, an emergency stop. So yeah, when you're delivering your training, don't always go to the areas where they do it on tests, because everyone's using the same spot. So be creative. Think of places you could go to do this. And you want to be looking for somewhere quiet, obviously. You don't want to be doing an emergency stop near pedestrians or some bloke cutting his hedge, because you'll frighten the life out of him. So think about doing it safely. Straight road, quiet road. Obviously, when you've got nothing behind you. So have a think about locations where you can do that safely. Okay, establishing the needs to do the emergency stop, practice the emergency stop exercise. So yeah, to put it into context for your pupil, in the essential skills, you should all have a copy of your essential skills. The emergency stop comes quite early on. It's in the chapter starting to drive. So is that an indication of what we should be doing this sooner than later? To be honest, in the past, I've done this at various times in people's journey. If they're going out for private practice with mum and dads, then it's something I would want to cover to make sure that they know that they can bring that car to a stop. So if a child did run out, that they could do that and feel confident doing it. So for me, I would bring it in quite early. But definitely not on a first, second lesson, anything like that. So it sort of come in, I don't know, lesson 5, 6, So, but that's just me. That is a personal thing. So, okay. So, establishing the need to do it. So yeah. So if they're going private practice, they're going to need to do this. We've already mentioned that the needs to do it is to preserve human life. So we're not doing emergency stops for pigeons in the road or squirrels. But would we do it if a deer run out? So we need to have these conversations, because if a deer run out, that could kill you. So so you'd need to be thinking about, yes, this would be a situation where you do it. So we're talking about when to do it and when not to do it. It's important to talk about when not to do these things, because if we ram on the brakes because a squirrel's run out and we've got a truck behind us, then human life, well, it could be our human life or our passengers. So yeah, so we need to think about the needs, so that we establish the need, and that will kind of fall into your part 3 standards check mode, where you're thinking about, is there a need for this lesson? So do that. Incidentally, as I've mentioned, part 3 and standards check, you'll notice on the form that it is an option to recap on an emergency stop. So that means don't spend the whole lesson like that they've never done it before, giving briefings and things like that. If you were going to practice it, it would just be like a practice, 10 minutes at best of your lesson, where you're just recapping and just having a quick practice. So this wouldn't be enough to form a whole lesson, because it'd be too stationary. There's too much stationary, not moving. They want the wheels moving. They want to see a driving lesson, not a theory lesson. So so that's my thoughts on emergency stop and standards check. Yeah, you do it, but it's only a recap, a quick, few minutes. Okay, so let's think about what's going to go into the lesson for an emergency stop. So we're looking at the briefing part now. These are the ingredients that you would put in, things to talk about. So number 1, it's got to be prevention. That's because we don't want to be doing emergency stops. An experienced driver, you as an experienced drivers will probably have hardly ever done an emergency stop, because you're a good driver, because you've got good awareness and planning skills and anticipation, and therefore you don't do them very often. So this is what we need to help our pupils with. A good sort of tie-in with pupils, they're doing the hazard perception on their theory test, how they're getting on with that. So you could do sort of bring that to a practical element. So maybe on the drive out to the training area where you're going to do the emergency stop, you could talk about that and how to prevent. But you'd be doing this on every lesson, wouldn't you? You wouldn't just save it for this lesson. You're always talking about hazards and risks, but you could maybe just focus on it and kind of give them some practical help on the way out, and thinking about spotting hazards like warning signs. So think about your static hazards, think about your moving hazards, talk about them. Talk about your potential hazards and your developing hazards, so making a difference between those, because that'll help them with their hazard perception, their theory test. When does a potential hazard turn into a developing hazard? So a good example of that might be, I don't know, a pedestrian's walking down the footpath on the near side, they've got their back to you, and they take that look over their shoulder. Well, that's a developing hazard. So at the point where you see the pedestrian, you think, okay, they're a potential hazard, but the moment they look over their shoulder, they're developing. Same with a push bike. If you had a look over his shoulder, it signalled, the hazard's now developing. And if we're encouraging our people to follow these best practices, defensive driving, following the 2-second rule, driving to the conditions, making sure their speed's at the right speed limit. Think about rule 126. Let's just delve into the highway code, because that'll give me a bit more inspiration. Let's just go there. So from rule 118, like in an emergency, starts talking about emergency stop skidding. So these are all good things you'd want to be covering with your pupil. ABS is in there, and the thing I was getting to there was rule 126. So rule 126, we should always be driving at speeds that will allow us to stop well within the distance seen to be clear. So that's that's the advice in the highway code. We need to be able to stop within the distance, so that will help your learners with their judging their speed. Could they stop in time if a kid was to run out behind that parked car? Tying into this, we could bring in the stopping distances and broken down into thinking and braking distances, and helping the pupil understand that and how that all works, and how conditions, weather conditions, road surface, driver fatigue, the tyres, the weight in the vehicle, all these kind of things, all the factors that would affect this. So if we're bringing that in, and I'm not just saying save it all for this lesson, but bring it in over the course of your lessons, because it's a journey, isn't it, learning to drive? We don't just want to cram everything we know about a subject in one lesson, because they'll probably forget most of it, and there'll be too much talking. So you have to get a good balance between theory and practice. Remember, it is a driving lesson. What I do with my pupils, I set this as homework. I'd say, right, get a highway code, and because next week we're going to do emergency stop, and I want you to read from rules 118, let's go 118 through to 126. There's not many there. There we are. That's what they've got to read. The 2-second rule, lovely. And then they can come to you, and they've done a little bit of work. They've kind of you encourage them to be responsible for their learning. So that's what I do. It doesn't work for everyone. Not everyone wants to do that. Some don't do it, and so we need to bring it in more practically, because reading a highway code doesn't suit their learning style. Okay, so let's get back to here. Okay, so we've talked about hazard perception, prevention, appropriate speed, rule 126, all that kind of stuff. We want to talk to them about what an emergency is, as I've just said, defining it. We're stopping as quickly and as safely as possible, under control, to preserve human life. That's the essence of what we're doing. So we need to define what an emergency is, when we'd do it, when we wouldn't do it. Okay, so we need to talk to them about a very prompt reaction. We can maybe talk about BBC, brake before clutch. get them to pivot their right foot from their gas to the brake. So say we want a really quick reaction onto the brake, because the sooner you do that, we're minimizing that thinking distance. That would bring that down. So link things in so all the stuff in the highway code starts to make actual sense in the real world. So so you can use BBC, brake before clutch. Be aware that some car manufacturers talk about brake and clutch together. So as long as it's not clutch and then brake, because that would be wrong, because now the car's coasting and effectively the car's speeding up at the moment we want it to slow down. So prompt reaction, maybe do some dry runs on that if you feel you need to with your pupil. We need to talk about progressive braking and what progressive braking is. So think about when your pupil normally stops. They might do three-phase braking where they go gently, firm, and then gently at the ends. Well, this is different. There's no gently at the end. It's like as the car starts to stop, they're going to apply more and more and more pressure until the car stops. So we'll have that horrible stop at the end. So we want to explain that to them and what we mean by progressive braking. Often it could be described as kind of like standing on your brakes, or squeezing an orange is a good way to sort of get them to think about what that actually means, progressive braking. So we want to define that. Want to talk about what they're going to be doing with their eyes, hands, feet. So eyes, if a child run out, would you be checking your mirrors? No, that's going to slow down your reaction time. We'll probably run the child over. So we want to be thinking about what their eyes doing, but be careful when you're saying don't check your mirrors, because they could take that to say, all right, we're doing the emergency stop now, and not check their mirrors at all. Move off, no mirrors, go around a parked car, no mirrors, and just think, oh, I've been told not to check my mirrors. So just be making sure it's clear what you mean about no mirrors in the event of an emergency. So clarify that. Hands, what the hands going to be doing. So really important that they keep their hands on the wheel during the emergency stop until they've come to a complete stop. Not to be tempted to go for a gear change or try and get the handbrake on before they've stopped, because that's going to put the rear wheels into a skids, and that's the last thing we want. So hands on the wheel until we have stopped, and the reasons why. We want to talk about the feet. We've talked about the fast reaction, brake before clutch. And what I would say to my pupils once they've stopped is to keep your feet still. So handbrake neutral, keep feet still, because we've got the benefit of the brake lights. So the brake lights will be on, won't they, if we do that. Think of a real emergency, a wet, rainy night. Keep the brakes on, because people are going to be coming up behind soon and they're going to wonder what's going on. So brake lights, they're going to think, oh, what's going on? So that's what I would do. Talking about ABS and controlling skids. So make sure that you're happy with your definition of how ABS works. Go to the essential skills, I think, just to help you. On the current version, I know they changed these versions, but it starts from page 95, stopping in an emergency, and anti-lock braking. Good explanation on there and how it works, and it's concise, not complicated. You want to make it nice and simple, and how the sensors work, and they release momentarily, allowing the wheels to maintain traction. So that's on page 97. Talk about, with your ABS, what is the main benefit? Because they get this as a question in the theory, and it's quite often answered incorrectly. What's the main benefit of ABS? And often they believe that it helps you stop more quickly. Well, that's not the main benefit. The main benefit is it gives you the ability to brake and steer whilst braking harsh. So the traction in the wheels, if you had to steer to swerve to go around this kid, the wheels will turn, but you maintain your traction, so you have the ability to brake and steer at the same time. So think about that. ABS, anti-lock braking system, gives you ABS, ability to brake and steer. So that's quite memorable. So that's a good little teaching strategy to sort of simplify things for people. So make sure you talk about ABS and what to do if they feel it, what it will feel like, to not release the brake, to keep firm pressure on the brake pedal until you've come to a complete stop. Let ABS do its job, and just think about that, because the controlled stop, we're trying to stop the car as quickly and as safely as possible under control without locking the front wheels. We're trying not to skid. We're trying not to put the car into a skid. And great, that's what we're supposed to do. So if our car didn't have ABS, we could still stop and have control. What I would always do with my pupils is, once we've done a couple of controlled ones, is to say, now I want you to do it, and I want the ABS on. I want you to put your foot through the floor, stand on them brakes, and we're going to grind this thing to a halt. And we want the ABS on. So I'd normally be doing this later on, once they've done a couple of decent ones, maybe the grand finale one, where we get up to 30 miles an hour. And they cram on them brakes. So now they will feel it. They will learn from experience, rather than me just saying what it feels like. They can actually feel it for themselves and how the car feels. And it's so important to make sure that they keep that car straight. Because in the real world, if we were avoiding the kid, we would steer. We need to tell them to steer to avoid the kid, because that's going to save human life. But in this exercise, we are keeping the car dead straight. And when you do it on your driving test, you keep that car straight. Don't try and steer the thing. So, yeah, so ABS covered, I think. I've probably forgotten something, but I'm sure you can leave me a little comment, because I am going unscripted with this. This is it. I'm just trying to keep everything I know that I'd want to include into this. So next thing, controlling skids. So we need to think that the pupil needs to be aware of like what causes a skids, and that to get out of a skid we need to remove the cause. So it's a skid through harsh acceleration, remove the cause. If it's a skid through braking, remove the cause. By coming off the brakes, we'll release the wheels. But in an emergency with ABS, we keep those brakes on. So we just want to make sure that they understand what's doing a skid. If they get into a rear wheel skid, so maybe use an object. I'm going to use a phone. Don't use a phone, because if you've got a phone in your hand and the engine's running, you're in trouble. So have a little model of a car in your car, a little model or a little box or something, and you can sort of more tactile, bring it to life. Because in the highway code, let me just go back to the highway code there. So there's a picture there of a car in a skid. Well, we could sort of do that more practically. Sort of say, so we're braking, so the weight's going hard onto the front. The back wheels are very light. So if we were to steer to the right, the back end is going to go that way, so we need to steer into it to the right to counteract. So we can sort of show them that practically about how the car is moving to help them understand. Because for me, when I see a static picture like that, I'm trying to work out where the arrow is, what's going on. So maybe use something more tactile that you can show them when you're delivering your briefing. So that's a good little tip to do. So we've got controlling skids, removing the cause. Rear wheel skids, steer into the skids. They need to know about that. What to do after the emergency stop. So as I've said, keep your feet still. I want the brake lights on, and clutch down just so the engine keeps running. Because with modern cars with stop start, once you pop that clutch up, the engine stops. Now you've lost the power steering and you've lost the brakes until the car moves again. Which, if you were hit, that would all start up again. But I would just, brake lights, keep the clutch down. Car's running, we're ready. Handbrake neutral. Okay, so we're going to secure the car, handbrake neutral. Think about the order, handbrake, then neutral, and the reasons why we're putting the handbrake on. We need to talk about moving off safely. So talk about the POM routine, how they're going to do that, how do they normally do that. You might not teach the 6-point check, that's fine. If you're pulling off from the side of the road, mirrors and a blind spot is fine. But after emergency stop, we've got the gap on the near side, so we do need all-round effective observation. So a 6-pointer is what you need, so include it. And yeah, and I think I already talked about this one, the thinking and braking distances and what affects it. So if the road's wet, loose surface, you know, all of that kind of stuff. So how much weight's in the vehicle. Now you probably think, well, that's quite a lot of information. So you have to sort of manage the flow of information. Initially, before the first one, don't blow their mind with all this stuff about skids and ABS. Just give them what they need to know about the procedure and what you're going to say. We need to cover that, what you're going to say before it. And let them have a go. And then build up and maybe say, well, now we'll do another one. And now I just want to talk about ABS. Do you know about it? Oh, no. So then you have a little 2-minute conversation or 3-minute conversation about ABS. And then they have a go and do it. So build up. On the drive there, you could be talking about, you know, the factors that might affect the skid. So I wouldn't get bogged down into like doing these long briefings. Briefings should be brief. Keep them short because pupils just want to get on and practice. But like I say, you've got several hours in a car with this pupil over the course of them learning, and you drip feed the information in. You know, just as it's necessary. You can be doing it on the move. So say, oh, what about this hazard? What are you going to do there? And what if it was raining today? How's that going to affect things? Oh, yeah. So, you know, all this information will come out, not just in one little segment, you know, throughout the course of your driving. So that's that. So let's talk about the managing the risks. And I want to talk about what the examiners will say on the driving test. So just to sort of give you a bit of info on the test, you know, you probably already know this. DT1, the driving test one, the examiner's guidance. Look under the emergency stop. This is their guide notes as what they need to be doing, and it covers a bit on ABS then there as well. So just be aware, and I'm going to go through it now. What you should be saying to your pupils. So pull them up. Do the briefing. You're happy. You're happy to go. We're going to give it a go now. Yeah. So in the signal I'm going to give you. So in a minute, I want you to drive off, and for this first one, I'd like you just to get up to second gear, 20 miles an hour. We'll just sort of do a kind of little dummy run, little dry run sort of thing. No, let's call it a slow run. Let's call it a slow run. So we just do one at 20 miles an hour. And the signal I'm going to give you will be stop. So it'll be the word stop and the hand signal stop. I want you to stop. And at that point, I want you to stop the car as quickly and as safely as possible under control. Before I give you that signal, I'm going to check all my mirrors and I'm going to look over my shoulder to check that is safe to do so. I will only give you that signal if safe to do so. So please wait for it. Don't be tempted when I'm looking over there to do this. Wait till I give you the signal. So make sure it's really clear what you mean and what you're going to do, and go through like that. And the examiners will do it in the same way. They'll say pull up on the left in a safe place, or pull up near this lamppost, and they'll say in a moment we're going to complete the controlled stop exercise or the emergency stop. And in a minute I just want you to drive off as you normally would for the road and traffic conditions. And when I give you the signal, which will be stop, I want you to stop the car as quickly and as safely as possible. Before I give you that signal, I'm going to check all round, but please wait for the signal before doing it. Are you happy with that? Okay, when you're ready, drive on. So that's what they say. Okay, as a trainer, you embellish that. You want to get a bit of buy-in, a little bit more of, you know, everything totally clear. And if you're using the same words as the examiner used, that's going to be good, isn't it? Because there's no like surprises. It's all like, yeah, they know what's going on. It's the same. Okay, good. So so manage the risk from behind. That is your responsibility. You must look out the back. You cannot just rely on your mirrors. You need to take a physical look out the back window before doing this exercise. And like I say, think about where you're doing it around parked cars. No, you want to be on your side of the road. You don't want to do it near pedestrians, and you don't want to frighten anyone. So don't do it near junctions. Yeah, that kind of common sense sort of stuff. So so that's managing the risks. I've already talked about sort of slow runs. Maybe the first one do it 20, then build up to 30. Dry runs is when the car's stationary, so if you wanted to see their quick reaction, brake, clutch together, you know, you could do that. Maybe you could do that if there's a problem, if you've just done one already and your pupil is slow on the reaction and they forgot to put the clutch down. Then a dry run before doing the next one could be a good idea to do. So yeah, think about that. And the last thing I've got on here is how many practices will you do? You know, because I say that because we don't want to do too many, do we? Because it's quite a, you know, it's not pleasant doing an emergency stop. All your internal organs get crushed against your rib cage. And yeah, you know, if you didn't have a bad back before it, you might have one after it. So just, yeah, don't do too many. I would personally do 3. That's max. 3 tops. 1 at 20, 1 at 30, 1 with the ABS. And each time ask them if they're all right to do another one. Do you want to do another one? Because we can just bring this in. Or if you think you feel sick, don't do another one. You know, saying that, you know, a while ago now, people did this exercise and they done it and they had like an adrenaline rush and they said, look, can I get out of the car? And was sick. So yeah, that was yeah, you see it all, don't you? So yeah, just be aware of how people's feeling. You know, people don't like going on roller coasters, but other people love it. So this is an adrenaline rush. This is like, this could upset them. So you know, they do, and talk about that. Talk about how they're going to feel afterwards, and after a real emergency, and indeed when they do it on the test, because they will naturally get a bit of an adrenaline kick. And they might just move up. The examiner says move off and they just don't look. They just, examiner says move, I go and I forget to look. So make sure they know what they've got to do and make sure they're doing it. Think of common faults that might come up with this. So think around eyes, hands, feet. Think of what faults you could do with your eyes, of looking in the mirrors. Think about the hands, going for a gear, going for a signal, going for a handbrake. Think about the feet, slow reaction, wrong foot braking, clutch then brake, soft braking, overlapping brake and gas. That's a good one, where you don't quite connect fully over the brake pedal. So as the brake goes to the floor, it catches the gas pedal. And so while you're braking and the clutch has gone down, the engine revs up. And so that can be a bit of a thing. I've had people do that. So when you've got faults, talk about them, analyse them, go remedy, fix. And that, I think really that is our emergency stop covered. So I dare say I've forgotten something in there, but how much do we want to put in there? You know, like I say, in reality, this part of the lesson, if I was introducing an emergency stop to a pupil, this would take 15-20 minutes. Little drive to the location, depends how long the drive is, obviously. Chatting about prevention. Get there, 5-minute briefing to get them going. Do the first one, maybe add ABS as another mini little briefing on that, and skids, and then have another couple of goes, and we're done. So keep it simple, keep it short, and move on to the next thing. So I'll see you in the next video for the next subject, and yeah, see you then.